So Andrew, why don't we start with yours, since yours is kind of the center of the concentric circle with the two propositions.
Actually, if you don't mind, Andrew, I could give some quick background about how what the
Oh,
two points
yeah.
of differentiation is.
Yeah,
So what
do it.
happened was, immediately after Kyle was acquitted, I did a video which went viral and listed what I was calling Kyle's Law. So I had a hashtag that was blowing up and starting to trend. And then I was listing several different things I'd like to see in an overall package of some form of legislation. And then as I was doing that, Andrew was simultaneously working on his video where he discusses Kyle's Law. So he inadvertently hijacked that hashtag. And then I was excited to have him do that because I love his idea. So I DM'd him and said, the Kyle's Law hashtag, let's refer to your specific legislative proposal as Kyle's Law. And I'm going to change what I'm proposing to Kyle's Pledge, which is a list of various things. And his Kyle's Law idea is actually one of the specific portions of that list that I've come up with that I've now called Kyle's Pledge.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's sort of how I started to see it. Also, was I actually thought that both of you guys were working together on it until you kind of explained to me through Twitter DMs like the background of it. So actually, well then in that case, Jesse, why don't you kind of list off the stuff outside of the Kyle's Law that you were proposing in your Kyle's Pledge, and I can pull up your tweets about it.
Okay. Yeah.
If that's helpful.
Or you can pull up my screen if you want, if that's easier.
Oh yeah, let's do it. Let's share your screen.
Okay, so this is the entire thread, which started with me, Kyle's Law. That's when I was trying to get that to trend. I gave some examples, things that would never happen if we had Kyle's Law. But then the ultimate list, as I sort of shifted towards the whole pledge thing, I did a video essentially saying, we need all of our politicians to back this. You're not going to get my vote if you don't support these proposals. So one of which is banning or in some way mitigating political prosecutions, empowering citizens if local governments abdicate their duties. So for instance, in Kenosha, the citizens of Kenosha, some were beaten half to death. Some had their entire livelihoods burned in front of them. There was no fire department and no police department to protect them. Their only recourse was to arm themselves or to ask other people to arm themselves to assist them in protecting their livelihood or their lives. So when a local government abdicates their duty to the tax-paying citizenry, we need some sort of recourse, whether they become financially liable for 100% of damages, even ignoring any insurance, they are 100% liable. Or maybe in situations like that, there could be some sort of emergency change where use of force law maybe changes, something like that. There's various things we could discuss to get there, but that's a big part of it. Fixing libel laws and stopping the media's politically based defamation and jury pool tampering, as we've all seen happen with Rittenhouse, considering 50% of the country thinks he crossed state lines with an automatic bazooka to execute, Black protesters. We've seen that in action, unfortunately. And I think Times v. Sullivan drastically needs to be revisited, dramatically so, because we need to do something about libel in those cases. And then standardized self-defense law. And this is really where Kyle's Law came into play. This is specifically Andrew's area of expertise, and the law he's proposing would go a long way in helping both banning political prosecutions and creating some sort of standard for self-defense law and the recourse potential defendants have should they be the victim of prosecutorial misconduct or a malicious prosecution.
All right. So I guess with that, why don't we go into Kyle's Law, the specifics of that, since you mentioned it. Andrew, we can talk about your
Sure.
sort of what that piece that would encompass that Jesse is sort of envisioning as part of his whole thing, but you kind of are just focusing on that.
Right. So everything that Jesse just pointed out is they're all reforms that would do well for the public and self-defenders in particular, especially in riotous conditions. I would support every one of those initiatives. My own concern is a bit more focused, and that is I frequently see these cases brought to trial, self-defense cases brought to trial, where there's literally zero evidence inconsistent with self-defense. In a case where the state knows ultimately they'll be obliged to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you have a normal, traditional prosecutor, and he looked at an investigative report where there was essentially zero evidence inconsistent with self-defense, he would never bring that case to trial because he knows he can't win it ultimately. But the cases get brought to trial for other reasons than legal merit, for politics, for pressure, for political capital, for the prosecutor's own prestige, to assuage riots in the community, whatever the case may be. But none of those are, to my mind, legitimate reasons for bringing these cases to trial. And I see scores of them. I mean, we start all the way back with George Zimmerman. Now we have the Kyle Rittenhouse case. There's many cases in between. And so it troubles me that these defendants can be dragged into the cost and peril of a trial on the whim of a prosecutor. And for folks to understand, the cost can easily be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the peril, there's never a 0% risk of conviction. If you're put in front of a jury, there's some percentage chance you'll get convicted, no matter how innocent you are. Innocent people do get convicted. And we shouldn't put someone to that cost and to that peril without good reason on the legal merits. And too often I see in these cases, there is no legal merit to the prosecution and the person's dragged in anyway. There should be either a real threshold that has to be met before a person can be dragged into court. And we're supposed to have a probable cause threshold. Unfortunately, it's pretty much a rubber stamp these days. Or if we're not going to have the threshold going in, then we need some consequences for the prosecutor coming out, when at the end of the trial, we can clearly see that there was no legitimate basis for bringing this case in the first place.